Into that, shall we, Alex Dean? What's your kind of response to all of this?
Watching your bulletin, I thought about leadership in two different senses. The first was Zelensky, who has emerged as a 21st century hero, and I thought it continues to amaze many, myself included. The other kind of leadership is a bad kind of leadership, which was hinted at with the potential involvement more directly of Belarus in this conflict. Lukashenko is Europe's last dictator. Not just called that by others, he's called himself that. He is not recognised as the president of Belarus by the United Kingdom, by the United States or by the European Union since he stole the election in 2020. That was an opportunity for Belarus to return to the community of nations. Instead, the dilemma we face now is if we sanction them because of their behaviour, just like as we've sanctioned Russia, we will drive them very quickly into the arms of the Russians. And within a relatively short period of time, we had the opportunity for them to rejoin the community of nations. Instead, it looks like they're going to be straight back into the arms of Moscow.
Yeah, and don't forget, by the way, some of us will recall the imagery, November, I think it was, about the whole refugee situation that Belarus played a part in trying to orchestrate. Yeah, and it is, I think you're quite right, it is terrifying because it's two schools of thoughts almost for me. No sane-minded individual wants any innocent person to suffer. So for me, my heart watches these awful imageries and hears the stories, etc. My heart says, get involved, do as much as we can, stop it, stop it, stop it. Then my head teeters, and you might think it's cowardly, my head teeters and then thinks, actually, whoa there, we need to be incredibly careful because this is such a sensitive issue with people that don't seem to have that much restraint at the heart of it. And it's terrifying. Joanna?
Well, I don't think that's cowardly at all, Michelle. I think you're absolutely right to take that approach. I mean, the fact is, 16 days into this conflict, it seems to be getting bleaker by the day. We've talked about Belarus coming in. We've talked about Putin trying to recruit Syrian soldiers as well, talk of chemical weapons, biological weapons. The whole thing just becomes more terrifying by the minute. But I do think we have to stay calm. We have to stay reasoned. We have to think with our heads rather than our hearts about this. But also, I think we need to be having half an eye on the end game. You know, it was from the very start, it was clear that this was not going to end well. But we need to be thinking about how we can bring about some kind of resolution in this situation, or how a resolution might be possible. And it seems to me that one source might be that some revolt comes from the Russian people themselves. And I think one thing that's absolutely beholden on us in the West is to make sure that we're not anti-Russian people, to make it clear that we are on the side of those Russian people who are very bravely, even now, taking to the streets to protest against Putin's regime. We need to make it clear that we're on their side. And I'm a little bit concerned that some of the rhetoric that's been coming out over the past few days, orchestras banning Tchaikovsky, for example, kind of makes out like we're against the Russian people, and we're not. We should be very, very clear that we're against Putin.
Well, you mentioned ISIS, by the way. I was just checking my facts here, and I was right. I thought I was. I had it in my head, but I just wanted to double-check it because it sounds so bizarre. But ISIS, of course, the terror group that we'll be familiar with, said in an editorial that the war, in their mind, is divine punishment for the West. They're basically calling it crusaders against crusaders and say it hopes that it will destroy enemies of Islam. I mean, if you've got ISIS on your side, whoever you are, I think that alone is cause for contemplation and reflection. Peter Edwards.
Well, every day there are new horrors, whether it's the acts of Vladimir Putin or some of the comments you're alluding to from other foreign actors getting involved in Ukraine. And I actually hope that not just we stand with ordinary Russian folk, but Britain's come together as well. It is a tough time. Of course, our hearts are primarily with the Ukrainian people who are going through unbearable suffering. I'm interested in what you said at the start as well, that Britain has to come together. We've had other debates over party political issues, and they've been very acrimonious at times. But Britain and the West, we've got to stand together against an evil dictator in Russia. And in terms of the next steps, we've got sanctions. To my mind, they've come a bit too late, but clearly the sanctioning of Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich means they are now picking up. I'm very interested that the debate is starting to come back to two areas because collectively it doesn't seem to be enough. It's the no-fly zone, but of course that means enforcement and possibly...
Are you in favour of a no-fly zone?
I'm incredibly nervous about it because as MPs of all parties have said, you have to enforce a no-fly zone. It's not just a policy, and enforcing it means potentially fighting in the skies with Russian jets. So we've got to treat that, I think, with absolute caution and sobriety. And I'm very interested in what Tobias Ellwood said, a Tory MP for whom I've got a huge amount of respect. He served in the army. This point about the role of NATO. Are we being a bit cautious in terms of what NATO can do. And I think this, I'm humble enough to admit I don't know what the answer is, but I think Tobias Sirlead is right. We've got to rethink what the role of NATO is, because we've gone from thinking Vladimir Putin is clever and evil to thinking he is evil and out of control and not rational.